Well, yesterday we ended up by talking about the mystery that has been hidden from ages. And I mentioned that the word mystery is this Greek word mysterion, which literally means something that is veiled and can't be seen because it's not visible to us. The fact that we can't see it doesn't make it not real. What it means is that we're incapable of seeing what it is. And until that veil is removed, we can never see what's really behind the veil. And that's what he says is the gospel of Jesus Christ, that the gospel was concealed in the Old Testament, but has been revealed to man in New Testament times with the coming of Christ, his crucifixion and resurrection. And Paul said that that was his ministry. His job was to really part the curtain so that people could see the mystery of the gospel. And then he goes on to say that in verse 27, to them, speaking to the Gentiles and the unsaved Jews, to them God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Now, how do I explain this? When I first got saved, it was like literally felt like the curtain had been pulled back, and I didn't know really what I was looking at, but I knew that what I was looking at was going to change my life forever. In fact, I knew that my life had been changed. It was a lot like, having a cataract surgery and you have those occluded lenses removed and suddenly everything comes bright and sparkly and you realize, as one of my secretaries said, she said after she had her cataracts taken off and her husband brought her home, he said she looked across the street and said, has that house always been blue? And he said, yes. And she said, I thought all this time it was gray. Well, that's that kind of change where the lens becomes clarified, but even more so, it not only clarifies the lens, but it magnifies so that you can see things that before were beyond the reach of your vision, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. And so you have this depth that comes into your life that you didn't have before. And I think that's really one of the very big differences, because I've known men and women who have tremendous mental intellects. They're very bright, very sharp, so much sharper and smarter than I am. It's really kind of embarrassing. But at the same time, I realize that there's a point to which beyond which they cannot see things. They can't understand. If they can't logically reason out something, then it doesn't make sense to them. And so they get confused by it, or they just walk away from it. And I think what Paul is saying is here that when the Gentiles who had been living in this kind of clouded, occluded, foggy world, just trying to feel their way through sometimes even great darkness, when they suddenly saw a light in the distance, they were attracted to it. Isaiah described it in those terms. He said that Christ would become a light to the Gentiles. And it's like that light in a very darkened place. That suddenly you are drawn, you're attracted to it, and you want to get close to it. You want to get as close to it as you possibly can. It reminds me that every time we go to Israel, one of the things I encourage people to do, and I've done it myself several times, is walk through what's called Hezekiah's Tunnel. And Hezekiah's Tunnel was a tunnel that was drawn when the Assyrians were attacking and coming upon the city of Jerusalem. The city had to secure a source of water, because the first thing happens is the enemy cuts off your water supply, and basically people begin to surrender and get weakened and even die because they don't have enough water to drink. So what they did was they dug an underground channel about 1,500 feet through solid rock, and the channel at its lowest, I think, is about 100 feet underground underneath solid rock. Think about that, 100 feet of solid rock over your head. And when you get in the middle of that tunnel, let me tell you, it is the blackest black. You can put your hand an inch from your face and you cannot see it. There's absolutely no light. And all of a sudden when you turn on a light, it's like everybody's attention immediately goes to that light, because we depend upon that to be able to figure out what's going on and where are we going and which direction should we go. And that's what the gospel does. It clarifies those cloudy moments in our life, and suddenly we have such crystal clarity when Christ comes in and illumines our heart, and we realize who we are and what we were created for, and we begin to figure out in very specific ways over time how that's to play out in our life. And let me be fair to saying that even though I've been in the ministry, been a Christian for well over 50 years and been in the ministry almost that long, one of the things I found is that every day is a new discovery, a new dynamic, a new dimension. And I think about when we started doing these podcasts. I mean, I started doing this because I didn't know what to do. The government, everything had been shut down. They locked down the churches. And I thought, how do we encourage the saints? And so this came into my mind, and I think it probably came from the Lord, because now here, years later, we're finding it as a useful tool in the lives of many people. It's been used by an astounding number of people to encourage them. And I'm kind of humbled and honored by that whole point. But he said, what we need to understand is that the richness, the greatest riches that we can experience in this life, the glorious riches, Paul says, of this mystery is what? It's Christ in you. You see, the Old Testament, when it talked to the Jews, said that the Holy Spirit would come upon them. It would be externally upon them, and it would empower them to do things. You know, the kings were anointed, the prophets were anointed, and God would work through them and empower them to do things. But Christians were the first to have Christ living in them. You know, John the Baptist wasn't born again because Jesus hadn't died and risen from the dead yet. He was a prophet, but he wasn't born again. Jesus was the only man on the planet who had God living inside of him. And when he rose from the dead, he sent his Spirit into the world that he might likewise begin to live inside of us. And that's why when I talk to people about living a successful life, there are a lot of things that you can point to and say, these are the evidences of my success. But the one thing that matters, and the only thing that really lasts eternally, is what God has done in here. He's placed his Holy Spirit. It's Christ living in you. That's the riches of glory. That's the greatest treasure that you possess. And the greatest miracle that ever takes place is not the healing of the sick. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I had two different individuals who were basically, the doctors said, they're done. They're going to die. And both of them have revived. One of them completely healed of both also a deteriorating heart as well as a cancer metastasized to his body. They're all gone. They're completely removed. And you look at that and just go, there's only one explanation. God did this. And ironically, this friend of mine, this happened after he decided that he would not take any of the medication that the doctors were giving him. Now, I'm not recommending that, but he felt very clearly in his heart that he was supposed to stop taking these meds, and so he did. And the amazing thing was, he not only recovered, but now he's perfectly healthy. I mean, it is one of those kind of miracles that we see talked about in the New Testament. And I remember being at his house and praying with him and his family, and part of the prayer was to help him, prepare for the end and to make that journey into eternity, and that he'd give the family grace and all this kind of stuff. And now I look back on it and go, God was planning on healing this guy completely. God planned on doing so much more than I could have ever imagined. As Paul said to the Ephesians, he does exceedingly abundantly above and beyond all that we think or even ask. And that's because you have Christ in you. That's the unique characteristic. And many people will look at themselves and say, well, I don't have anything special to offer. I don't have any great skills. I don't have any great gifts. As if God is dependent upon your abilities. God does not depend upon your abilities, that everything that I do with my abilities is just going to be wood, hay, and stubble. What God does is he moves in us and then he moves through us. It's the overflow of the Holy Spirit. You might call it the spillage from your life that is going to have the greatest impact upon the world that's around you. And so don't diminish your value. Because what has made you value, I know, granted, your body is nothing but a clay jar, but inside of that clay jar, there's a treasure beyond measure. It reminds me of one of the places we go in Israel called Bet Shan. It was called Scythopolis in New Testament times, but Bet Shan of ancient Israel. But as they were excavating it, they found this one store or marketplace where, it had a stone lintel and a stone uprights as the doorposts. And they had a great earthquake in the 7th century that caused most of the city to collapse. And they found the skeletal remains of an individual who was trying to exit the building with a clay jar filled with gold coins. And the lintel collapsed and crushed his skull. And when they excavated, they found the skeletal remains, the crushed skull. They also found the vase with all of these 99 gold coins in it. And I thought, sad story for that guy. But the whole point that I would say is that The clay jar was nothing special. What made that clay jar special and has caused it to end up in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem is the fact that it had those 99 silver coins inside of it. What makes you special? Not you. What makes you special is that you have Jesus living in here. That makes you invaluable. And we need to recognize that we have that preciousness, that God looks at us with that kind of value and preciousness. Every time he looks at you, he smiles. God bless you. See you tomorrow.